Today I'm talking to another composer, and this time it's Dave Lowe, who is known for, well, composing quite a lot of game music, mostly conversions from arcade games from the 80s and 90s. So, hello, Dave.
Hello.
Pleasure to
Yours.
meet you.
Yeah, and you. 12 years, long time.
That's true. Yeah, but when we talked in the email, you said you didn't really stay so much in touch with video gaming for a while, right?
No, I didn't. I got out of it um, towards the end of the 90s, really, and went back to recording, in the music business.
Ah,
Um, Basically, because all the software houses I was working for, they started to want me to work in-house, go to an office and work 9 to 5, and I just wasn't into that. Wasn't really what I did.
how did
So,
you actually start becoming a video game composer?
well, it started when, first of all, I learned to program on the ZX81, learning Z80 machine code, and I moved on to the Spectrum, and I did a thing called Buggy Blast, which I programmed, and then I did a thing called Thrust, which was a big hit on the Commodore 64, I believe, but I did the Spectrum version. And after that, Firebird, who I did it for, they came to me because they knew I was a musician and said, would I do the music for a game called Rasputin, which my brother-in-law had written. I wrote Buggy Blast with him, and he went on to do Rasputin, and I went back to the music business. And then Firebird asked me to, or Rainbow, I can't remember which one, asked me if I'd do the music for that. And so I said yes, so I did. And basically, from then on, I just got calls to do other stuff and other stuff. Starglider, which, a lot of the Firebird and Rainbird stuff, the microphone stuff would come from there.
So you actually started out as a coder in the first place.
I did, yeah, yeah. It was a form of, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it was a form of relaxation because I was so heavily into the music business that when I'd come in, I would be tapping and banging and playing things and stuff. And my wife used to drive her crazy. And she said, "Can't you get a hobby?" So I took up electronics for a little while, but I wasn't so good at that. But then I saw the ZX81 on advert sale, and I thought, that looks interesting. And I learned to program it, and it was that really that started. Yeah.
So actually, you were originally a musician, then you had computers as a hobby, and then you turned your hobby into
Yeah,
business, kind of.
I did both. Yeah. And then I packed up programming and went back to music.
But I did some interviews with other composers like Chris Hülsbeck and Jeroen Tel, and they told me that in the 80s, basically you had to code your program to compose music back then.
That's right, you did. Yeah, there wasn't. I think now they use set modulars programs that run stuff. But yeah, you had to write your own drivers. So you had to be able to write machine code and understand the architecture of the machines. Um, and of course, because I did lots of the different machines, a lot of different platforms, Amiga, Commodore, Spectrum, and then Atari, and then through onto the games consoles as well. You had to learn the languages for all those. So it was quite interesting. Yeah.
That's actually true. I mean, when I look on your list, you did like everything, Double Dragon 2, F-15, Afterburner for the Amiga, like everything, hard driving. It's incredible. I mean, um, is there a reason why you basically? It seems you basically focused on conversion of arcade game music.
Um, what actually happened was the bigger titles I did, like Starglider, Elite 2, um, Carrier Command, stuff like that. Um, I would tend to write those, but in doing so, you was constantly getting phone calls from the software companies who wanted you to, they had, this game they wanted converted and this stuff. And it was all money. So yeah, why not? It was a business. So I did it.
Well, interesting, for example, I mean, one of your biggest hit for the C64 is obviously Power Drift. And if you take into account, I think the original hardware, Sega 16 on the arcade, has like 16 voices, and now you were forced to put it into three. And,
Yeah,
and, and some people even say that your version sounds better than the original, you know?
yeah, well, they're very kind. But yeah, obviously it was it was quite a big challenge. I mean, that was the thing I liked about it, really. I liked the challenge of the fact that you only had three voices, or like when we did Star Glider, to get a sample running out of the Atari ST, which didn't do samples, and that was the exciting thing for me. And it was at the late '90s when you could run CD tracks on your PC, and that's when the challenge went out of it because anyone could do it then. So that's when I stopped.
But there are some things you never did. I mean, you never did digital samples on the C64, for example.
No, no, I never did. No, just never got around to it. Basically, I mean, those years from I think '87 to about '98 or something, it was solid. You know, every day, every day of the week, m- through most nights. There was just so much work to do, um, and there was always new jobs coming in. So yeah, I mean, the C64 for me wasn't my main machine that I did work on. I did mainly the Amiga and ST, but the one thing that was really surprising when I went to the Commodore 64 because its instruction set is very limited compared to the 68,000 machine or even the Spectrum, the ZA. But what it had, which was far, far better than the Spectrum or Atari ST and stuff, was the SID chip, which was brilliant. It was such a good chip, and it was really enjoyable to make music on that. Even though it only had three channels, it was a proper little synthesizer. You know.
That's actually true. And you called yourself Uncle Art, actually.
Yeah, that just came from we needed a company name. Um, I had an uncle whose name was Arthur. His name was. When I was a kid growing up, everyone called him Uncle Art, and he was right weirdo. He was really, really clever guy. He got scholarships to all sorts of universities and all that stuff. But he wasn't interested. All he ever wanted to do was run the lift in Barclays Bank in London. He just wanted to be a lift man, and that's what he did. Apart from he also, in our family, we would have a Christmas club where all the family would put money in for Christmas. And my granddad, he would save it, and then it was a way of saving because we weren't very rich. And so at Christmas he would hand it all back out. But my uncle Art, he took it all down the dog track and he blew it all one Christmas on the dogs and lost it. So he became very famous for that in the family.
I see. I see.
And that's where the name came from.
So you said you are very, very busy with doing the music for games that you were called all the time. So what was your typical way of actually doing the music? I mean, have you had access to the original machines, or how did you actually do it?
Sometimes we would get sent a recording of it. Many times I would have to go down the arcades and listen to it. Um, and sometimes when we couldn't get the arcade music, we would write our own piece. That happened here and there. Um, but generally, yeah, we would have to go to the arcade and listen to it a lot to learn it.
Which also means you had to play the arcade to get the
Yeah,
different musics.
that's right. Yeah. And playing it, you'd get quite good at it, So you had to see all the different levels and stuff. But a lot of the time, obviously, we'd have to ask the publishers or the developers for a recording of it because I was based in Scarborough, which I am now, and there are quite a few arcades down there, but they didn't have all the machines, so sometimes they'd have to supply the music. If they wanted a copy of it, they would have to show us how it went. And sometimes we'd get it sent from a different machine. They'd send a Amiga version of it. So this is how it goes. And so we'd have to work from the Amiga version on the Commodore.
Ah, yeah. So that was, for example, when it was released for one home computer first, and you had to do the
Yeah,
music for the other version.
yeah, that's right. That version would come out first, and then they would want it on the other platforms.
I see. Yeah, I mean, what is also interesting when you listen, I mean, when I listen to your music, you always have this typical drums. It seems, you could always recognize like, wow, this is Uncle Art's song track, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I wasn't really aware of that, but yeah, maybe you could. I mean, in the end, obviously, in the drivers, originally, I would write the notes in, A flat, crotchet, G flat, G minor for a quaver, and write them in as patterns, very much like a drum machine works. But in the end, I realised that was so slow and I couldn't keep up with doing stuff like that, I understood MIDI. So, and because I can play a keyboard, um, I would then play it on a MIDI sequencer and then take the MIDI file and I'd write my own piece of code that would convert the MIDI file into the patterns that I used in my driver. So it was a quicker way of doing it.
So you kind of recycled old instruments
Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah.
and that is why
I
you
would, I
have
would,
this typical sound.
yeah, I would take the note data from the MIDI. Yeah.
Interesting. So you said at the beginning you were mostly located where you are now. So you never actually changed places and went to the company who hired you. You did all from home.
I did it all from this studio here. Yeah. But I mean, I did go down and see. I mean, I'd go and see Jez. When we were doing Star Glider and IK Plus, I went to Arch McLean. Um, and it's quite interesting that because I never realised till just a little while ago that Rob Hubbard actually did the Commodore 64 version of IK Plus, didn't he? And,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and when I was with Archer McLean, I had the impression that I never realised till about a month ago when somebody told me that Rob did it. Yeah, I didn't know he'd done that.
So actually, you were mentioning at the beginning that a lot of games actually became quite hits. Um, so did you actually follow what happened to games that weren't hits? I mean, there are game conversions that were not really that well received. For example, Street Fighter 2 on the C64 was awfully slow, you know, and it
Yeah.
didn't really get a lot of good reviews. Um, and it wasn't that kind of disappointing you that you put so much work in something, and of course you got your money, but still some games didn't make quite well.
Yeah, I mean, that did happen, but we were always on to the next one. So, I mean, to be honest, there was a lot of the games, I never even saw the games. And that's the truth. I mean, they would ring me with a brief. If it was an original, um, they would say, it's a so-and-so type of game, we need 15 pieces of music, title, in-game ends, the usual stuff. And I would write the pieces, send it to them, and they go, okay, fine, yeah, we like this, that's it. And I never even saw the game on some of them. So no, I didn't know always how well they were received. I mean, I remember getting hard driving on the Commodore 64, and the game virtually didn't run, if I remember rightly.
Yes, it was more like a slideshow, and you could
Yeah,
hardly drive. Yeah.
yeah, it was. And I remember thinking, this will never actually get out, surely, it doesn't actually work. And I did, I think I did the music. I can't remember. Did I do the
Yes,
music? I did.
you did,
Um,
indeed.
whether the game actually got released or not, I was never sure because when I saw it, I thought, no, there's no way that will ever actually get released.
Yeah, but I have one here. Wait, I will show you. I'm sure
Okay.
you remember that, hopefully, because that's one of my favorites. This one.
Oh, Power Drift. Yeah,
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 that's truly classic, and
yeah. It's a
especially
good
that
game.
music, as I mentioned earlier, it's amazing.
Yeah,
And now there's interesting question. I mean, I interviewed, for example, the sound manager of Epics once, Chris Crick, and he did more the American music, summer games, summer edition, and stuff. And how about the timing issue? I mean, I asked him, and he said they weren't aware that Europeans had a different timing than the Americans. How was it in your place? Because interesting thing is about Power Drift, there are a lot of remixes coming out, and when Americans do remixes, the music plays too fast because Activision never fixed the speed in the American release.
right. Yeah, because it would run faster, wouldn't it? Mm.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. No, and we never really knew about that. No, we would just do it on the UK versions, and that was that. I remember doing Power Drift because I was given the Amiga version, I think, to learn the tune. I think that was right. I might be wrong, but I remember we had the Amiga version here, which we played for hours and hours and hours to learn how the music was. And yeah, that was a good time.
So you ever never saw David Crane because he coded the game? You just send in the music.
Yeah, generally we would just send in the music and we would not see it in the finished game. No.
Hmm.
No.
But doesn't it disturb you in a way that a piece isn't playing right in all regions of the Commodore world?
Yeah, I never really thought about it at the time. You, you ring the bell actually. I do remember something about it because we'd run them at 50 hertz and 60, I think, probably in the States, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the
And
thing.
yeah, and of course it would run faster. Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember that being an issue, um, or even knowing about it particularly. To be honest, as I say, we were so busy most of the time that we would do it. It would work. We would send it. They would confirm, yeah, we accept it, and we were on to the next one.
But is there any way a piece of music that you really enjoyed making and that you remember and that you think of yourself as the best you have done so far?
Um, yeah, there was a lot. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of it I really enjoyed, and it's difficult because when you're working on a piece, it plays over and over and over and over, and you're correcting bits, changing bits. You hear it, and you get to know it so well that even if it's rubbish, you think it's great. It's like you hear it so much, you know it backwards. Yeah, it's difficult. You get too close to it sometimes, so you never really once you know it that well, you can't tell from the outside whether it's a good piece or not. You just you get to know it, you get too close to it, really.
But would you sometimes go out when you did some piece of music and actually get a magazine and read about the reviews?
Oh yeah, would do that. Yeah, see if we got a good review on the music. Yeah, yeah. I expect everybody did that. uh, yeah, we'd see some of those. Uh, I would.
I mean, we have to take into account that back in the 80s and 90s, actually some gamers bought the games because of the good music sometimes,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I believe that's true actually. Yeah, um, yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that's starting to come back into it now for me. When I look at modern games now, I think the music's starting to be really good again now. Whereas I think it went through like the music business did in the 60s and stuff when I grew up and I was a teenager and we had the Beatles and the Stones and all that, those innovative bands and stuff. It was really exciting. And then it got really in the doldrums and it kind of went a bit crap. And now it's picked up again. There's new bands and there's new artists doing different things and stuff. And that happened, I think, with the computer industry, the gaming industry. In the beginning, when we were doing it from small studios, bedrooms and garages and stuff, not just the music, but the actual games themselves were so innovative and so exciting. And it was brilliant. But then the corporations got involved and more money got chucked at it and it became, I don't know, it just got dumbed down and dumbed down. And I know all the big AAA games now that come out, they all have big works of classical music and stuff recorded everywhere on them. And that's fine. And there's some really good stuff. But I really like looking at the indie companies who are doing, I don't know, they just seem to have great ideas. You think, what a great idea, Sometimes they don't have the funding to get it finished. But I always stick with the little man. I like the innovation of it. That's what interests me. Yeah.
So you actually keep track with the current development. You never really left the video game business well unmonitored, I would say. You always kept an eye on it.
No, I didn't. To be honest, I didn't for a while. I mean, a couple of years ago, I started looking again at developers, small developers, what they were doing, and started to think, yeah, it's coming back. They're starting to program again on and come up with their own ideas, you know. Whereas it came to a point where only the major publishers could put games out. I suppose the internet changed that, didn't it? People put their own games out, do their own music, do their own graphics, or they get a friend in to do. That's the stuff I like, the indie side of it.
Well, nowadays you have Steam and the
Yeah,
smartphone area
yeah,
where basically anybody can release anything.
yeah, that's right. And obviously from that you do get a lot of rubbish, but in amongst that rubbish you get these little gems of brilliance. And it was the same when I started doing it, when I was in that business. I mean, there was single people, just single programmers who would write a whole game. Like David Braben and stuff. Him and his partner. I mean, they knocked out Elite and stuff. They didn't have enormous amounts of money behind them. They would just work really hard and be innovative to get it done. And it was that, I think, that went out of it once the big money got into it. It kind of ruined it a bit. But I'm glad to see the indie developers are kind of still there, still doing it. Yeah.
That's interesting. So, well, anyway, I saw actually you are re-releasing your stuff soon. I mean, you started a Kickstarter campaign, and that's actually how I got in touch with you, because
Okay.
I saw you actually are planning to re-release the the old video game musics you did from the 80s and 90s. Tell me a bit about that. I think it's called Uncle Art Elite 2 Orchestral Retro Gaming Music Remix.
That's right. Yeah. What happened was just over the years, I would constantly get messages of people who would find me or my daughter, especially who was much more, interactive on the internet and stuff. And they would say, "Can you get your dad to redo his music? Can we get, redone copies of this and that?" And I used to go, "No, no, no, nobody wants that." And she'd say, "Yeah, Dad, they do. They keep asking for it." And eventually she convinced me to, okay. So we're kind of doing that. whether it will come off or not is another matter. I mean, the thing for me was to be able to do, because I didn't write the music for the 3-channel chip or the 4-channel samples. I wrote it as a piece of music on a piano or a guitar. For me, it had big orchestrations and drums and brass and guitars in my head. Obviously, I couldn't do those. So I'd have to pull it down to get it onto a Commodore chip or a guitar.
I see.
And so for me, it'd be quite interesting to remake those tunes as I really wanted them, and with the Elite Frontier stuff, like, it was almost all classical. And we really want to take that into somewhere like Abbey Road and do it with a proper 32 or 50-piece orchestra, as I imagined it when I wrote it. But we could never really get it on the Amiga or anything else sounding that way. So that's why we do it.
So actually, you did the version on the synthesizer and on the piano first, kind of.
Yeah, I would write the pieces on the piano, and then I would have to cut it down to fit it onto stuck with 3 channels, 4 channels. So it'd be really good to be able to make them properly.
So once it's out, well, hopefully get all the money together, then it will be the versions on the CD, I guess, that you originally had in your head back then.
Yeah.
Do you still have such recordings from back in the days, or?
I do have. When I would write them, I would make rough demos of them, just studio demos with bits of guitar, piano, drum machine stuff on there, just so I would use it as a reference. So when I was putting it onto a computer, I would remember the little bits that I'd had the ideas for, but obviously a lot of that used to get dropped out. But now there's no limits to it now, so it would be good to remake it properly.
Great. And what is actually your plan with it? I mean, once it succeeded, do you want to actually put it on your page and like continuing to allow people pledging for it over PayPal? Because that is what most other Kickstarter campaigns are actually doing. Like the Kickstarter itself closed, but if you are too late or something, you can still get it from the homepage and via PayPal and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen them doing that. I don't think we'll do that. We're kind of doing it on the Kickstarter. If you back the Kickstarter, then and we get the funds, then we'll make it and we'll do it as best as we can possibly do it. And only the people who really backed it will get it, and that will be that. Then, I want to move on then to doing something else.
Interesting thing is you are coming at a time with the Kickstarter where many others actually doing the same. For example, Chris Hülsbeck, who is doing a piano collection of Turrican 2, which he just finished in February. So you're not the only one. So
no, I know. I saw Matt Gray, and I spoke to Matt a little while ago actually. Yeah, he's doing this Commodore 64 stuff, and what I've heard of it sounds pretty good. So that's going to be good. Yeah, I mean, when Holly, my daughter, said to me, "Dad, let's do this," people like it. I was absolutely amazed at the size of the amount of people who wanted to hear, retro gaming music, and play and still play those games on the original machines or emulators. I was absolutely amazed. I didn't know it existed really.
So for you it was like flip-flop and not something somebody would listen on a daily basis or on a CD?
No, obviously I'd gone back into the music business, mixing albums, doing production on stuff and playing sessions, as a musician. I'd really gone out of the computer music stuff. So it was a real surprise to me how big that retro gaming scene is. Yeah, and it's amazing.
Yeah, especially in the past 5 years, you have commercial magazines coming out, Retro Gamer, and actually doing a German version too, and press is coming out. And as I said, people are actually finding it on their attic and they are using it again, and prices are getting high on eBay because everybody wants the real hardware now,
Yeah,
and
that's
no
right.
longer the emulator only. So
No,
that's actually true. So, um, do you think it's a positive development? For example, I remember my parents, they would think it's like computer trash. Why do you want to spend your time on computer trash?
yeah,
Put it in the dump.
yeah, I can understand, but I don't know, there's something about, I suppose it's a bit like, like my guitars on the wall. They're all really ancient, most of them, because the newer models just aren't the same. They build them the same, they look the same, but they don't sound the same. And I suppose it's the same with the machines. You know, I don't run a lot of emulators. I've tried some, but they don't sound the same, really, do they? As a Commodore 64. I mean, I went in the studio loft and got out. I had two Atari STs up there, two Amigas. Both STs blew up the minute I plugged them in. One Amiga just didn't work at all. The other Amiga, that worked for a while. Then the hard drive packed up, and all my source code, everything was on that hard drive. And I can't get that to run at all. But I've been sort of a lot of helpful people who've said, no, we can get it running for you. So I'm going to send it to them to get that running. There's Spectrums up there. I've seen them in a box, and somewhere up there is a couple of Commodore 64s, but I haven't found them yet because that loft up there is just full, absolutely full of stuff from those days.
Great. So you're actually checking your old stuff on the real hardware to prepare for the recording? Or just because you're interested in it, how it was back in the day?
Yeah, just because I really like to hear it, actually. Yeah, I mean, I listen to people. People send me messages now, and now we're doing the Kickstarter thing. And they say, "Oh, you did this piece um, on a machine, and I play it," and I just can't even remember doing it. You know, just we used to do so much, I suppose. But see, I remember a lot of it. But there are some pieces that people go, "Oh, you did this piece," and I listen to it, vaguely remember it, but not that well.
Well, I mean, you even did some. I read on Wikipedia. You even did some special things on the Amiga, like using digital samples where others before others used tracker music.
Yeah, yeah, I did use I think I was doing it before Tracker Music actually came out. So I'd written my own drivers, yeah, that it worked. I made sure that the um, the notation, the way the um, drivers worked, was the same across all the machines. So if I'd done a piece on the Amiga, for instance, I could take the note pattern data that I'd converted from the MIDI that I'd played on the keyboard straight onto the Commodore 64, and obviously it wouldn't play samples, but the note data was there, and then I could point it at the chip, and I could use the modulation stuff to run it like that. Um, but yeah, I did have my own drivers on all the machines.
Well, there are some interesting things. I mean, when I look at games that you did the music for, you did it quite different in aspect of voice counting. I mean, for example, when Jeruntel did and for I think yes, it was RoboCop 3. He actually used one voice for the music because the other two were for sound effects. But in the games where you did the music, it actually you used all three channels, and every time there was a sound effect, the leading voice would be switched off.
Yeah, that was basically the way we just did it. Yeah, that we would overwrite one of the channels with the sound effect at the time. Um, basically because when you've got three channels in music, to use one in music is a bit you can't really get much on it. So yeah, I would use three and then overwrite whichever channel, either whichever channel was basically free at the time, or if one wasn't, whichever was doing the least at that point with the sound effect.
So you weren't really a fan of the multiplexing and fast instrument switching that other composers did? For example, in Turbo Outrun or something, you have two channels and then you switch the instruments in the channels so fast that it almost sounds like three channels, you know?
Oh right, yeah, yeah. You would put, in music you get there's gaps. You play a couple of beats,
Exactly.
say on the drum track, and then there's tiny little gaps before the next drum beats, and in that you could fit a chord. So you put the drum beats in the chord and the drum beats in the chord. Yeah, oh yeah. I think all us musicians did that sort of stuff. I think. It's the only way
But
to cram everything in.
you didn't do that actually to replace one sound channel because it was on the sound effects. You used all three, but you used that technique to get more dynamic on the power drift tune, especially
Yeah, I
from what I
can't
figured.
remember. But yeah, is that what we did? I'd have to hear it again. I haven't heard it for years, but um, yeah, it was. I mean, basically it was. We've got three channels. We've got to fit as much on here as we can possibly get on because I like it to be full, and sound full. You know. And so I didn't want to cut out a channel just to run sound effect on. Although obviously with the motorbike engine, it would take a full channel, so you would lose, you know, you would lose a channel to sound effects like continuous ones like that.
And another thing you really didn't do is using much filters, right?
Um, we did. I used We're talking Commodore 64 now, aren't we?
Yes. Oh, sorry, I
Um,
forgot to mention that.
yeah,
Yes, true, true.
um, yeah. I'd used modulation and what you would now term filters as such. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe not as much as some others. Maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah, but because you had the problem that the older SID, I think it was 6581 from the early 80s, sounded totally different than the one from the later 80s.
Yeah,
And seeing that a lot of your music was from 87, 88, I think you used mostly the newer SID.
right. I can't remember to be honest. No,
Ah, okay,
I
right.
mean, I had obviously we had quite a few Commodore 64s here because we get through them quite quick. Um, Mainly the keyboards would give out. Um, yeah, so I mean there were different ones with different chips in.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah,
That's
we, we,
interesting.
we
That's
had
it.
different machines. And
That's
we just
interesting.
work on whichever one we had. Like I say, we used to break them basically quite a lot. Um, so we just have to get another one and work on that. Uh, I mean, the publishers never said it has to be on this chip or that chip. It
Oh,
was
okay.
just,
And you
uh,
didn't have any preferences.
no, not really. No, no, we just try and make it sound as good as we could on whatever machine we were using at the time.
You said your main machine was Atari and Amiga.
Yeah.
So you more went towards 16 bits, or was it just because at the time you started composing it had more market demand?
Um, Not really. I mean, obviously there was more market demand for it. Once the Amiga came out, um, a lot of publishers wanted music on it. They would convert from big title games, from films and stuff. So we'd get the jobs doing them. But once again, great as the Amiga was, because you could run all the samples on it, it wasn't a synthesizer. So it wasn't the same as the C64. The C64 was the only one that really, you know, felt like it was a little synthesizer, which made it really entertaining to work on, to try and get stuff out of it. But, well, basically, I'd hear other people doing stuff, and I think that's really good how they've done that. How did they do that? You know, try and work on drum sounds or whatever. You know, I've heard them do.
Well, we spoke a lot about computer music. How about the video game consoles? Anything you remember in particular about that area?
Um, I remember, you know, I can't even remember which ones we did. We did Sega, Game Gear.
For example, you did music for the Atari Jaguar?
Yeah, somebody was telling me that I did that a little while ago, and I do vaguely remember that. I think we only did one title on it because I don't think it was a big seller, was it?
Yeah, because it was so hard to code on it.
Oh, is that what it was? Yeah, I must have written the driver for it, but I don't even remember what game it was. I do remember we had one here.
It was Cybermorph.
Cybermorph, that rings a bell. Couldn't tell you how the tune went.
From 1993, actually. It was a 3D shooter.
Yeah, I remember the title. That's about it.
So, what do you think was your best game music in total?
The music I liked best was stuff I did for Elite 2, Frontier, the Kestrel pieces I did for that. They were my favourite pieces, as well as I liked the Starglider pieces I did. Well, they used to put them on the tape, you know, and sell them with the game, so I could do actual studio recording. And there were quite a lot of titles that we did actually on the machines, but you know, it was so long ago now I can't even remember which ones they were. But,
well, it's interesting that you mention it because that is actually what was special about those games, that you delivered a tape with it, you know, music cassette tape, you know.
Yeah, that was quite different, I think, wasn't it? Well, that was good because it gave us a chance to expand. You know, we weren't limited to if we were doing a sample on the Atari ST. You could fit a 15-second sample on it on the loader, and that was it. Whereas with the tape, you could do 4 or 5 minutes. You know. Well, that was more fun to do. Yeah.
So, how was it actually? As I said, limitation. Was there some kind of memory limitation you were told? I remember the Street Fighter 2 samples are really, really very short on the C64, like a couple of seconds, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be memory limitations. The programmers would be so pushed for memory that we'd get a tiny little, you know, allocation of memory. You've got to fit it in wherever it was, you know. So the whole driver and the data and everything had to fit in.
So it actually had that you were a coder yourself. You would probably sometimes work hand in hand and helping those guys doing the games and I don't know, maybe saying like do it this way, then you save more memory, or
no, not really. They were. The truth is, my contact with the developers was literally. Sometimes I go and see them, but normally it's just on the phone. And they'd say, look, we got this amount of memory available, you know, can you get it in there? And I'd go, yeah, okay. And we'd have to just fit it in. That was it, you know. They, obviously, the game came before the music. You know, so we were always last. I mean, we were always, you know, last in the thing that we they'd come to us for the music when they only had a month before duplication. So, and then because they had duplication dates and they were very expensive, they'd have huge financial penalties if we were late. We'd lose £1,000 a week for every sort of game we didn't get in, every sound we didn't get in time. That was in the contract, So
So you
you had
did.
to get it
So
on
you
the
did your
deadline.
music on time pressure, actually.
Oh yeah, terrible time pressure. We'd be up all night. Yeah. I remember actually that I think it was on the ST, first time ever we'd ever heard of a computer virus. And we picked one up off a disk one of the developers had sent us. He obviously didn't know it was on there. And it was
Ooh,
on there and it wiped everything. Took,
seriously? Oh,
yeah, it wiped everything. I forget, I mean, it did enormous damage. We were up for 3, 4 days and nights. I had somebody in helping to, recover stuff.
oh.
It was quite, yeah. We were always very careful about this after.
It's interesting that even back in the days you had viruses, you know.
Yeah, that was the first time. I can't remember what game it was. It was definitely on the Atari ST, I remember. Um, can't remember what it was.
Um, well, looking back at what you did in the past, I mean, I'm sure you also saw that there are new C64 games coming out nowadays. Some even, like commercial, as a hobby with the packaging and on a cartridge and a manual and so on. So, but really not for profit. But if you were asked if you would do another tune for, let's say, an Atari or Mega Drive release or a C64 release, would you say yes, I will do it
Oh, I
just for
do.
the fun of it?
Yeah, yeah. I do miss it. I quite miss it. It was a challenge and it was good fun. You know. Yeah. I mean, I'd have to remember how to do it. I mean, when I got that Amiga out of the loft and the one that did work a bit off the hard drive, and I was quite, I looked through all my source code and my drivers and thought, oh, yeah, I see. I remember I had to learn how my driver worked, looking through the 68,000 codes and the assembler. But yeah, it came back to me. So I
Well,
would be quite interested in doing more. Yeah.
I guess it's like riding a bicycle. You really never forget how it works totally, right?
Yeah, but no, I spent years doing that stuff, and yeah, it stays with you. Yeah. I mean, I still fiddle with programming all the time, just for the hell of it. You know, normally on a PC still. But
Oh, you still code nowadays?
I do just for myself. Yeah, just in assembler. Yeah.
What, for example?
Well, I've been involved a little bit in over the last 4 years, on and off, in writing a diagnostic thing called Blister, um, under a company called Blister Systems, and it's like the reason why I was involved was because what it is, it's a system that runs. Um, it has its own instruction set that you put into your source code, and whatever you put in, it outputs it to its own custom-made screen, and it does it while the game runs. So you can see all the variable data, anything, where it's lists of arrays. It works really, really fast. But the thing we wanted to do with it was make it so it works like a recording system. So you've got, just like on what a DAW is, digital audio workstation, like you use Cubase or
Oh
something
yes,
like,
Cubase. I know.
yeah,
I
or
know.
Pro
Yeah.
Tools, that sort of stuff. Well, it works on the same principle as that, but instead of recording sound, it records data. So it records it and you can play it back. You can step it slowly. So when the machine crashes, it doesn't matter. You can have a crash and you can just look through all the data, see what happened, show you where it happened. Especially now with machines running stuff on threads. It's very difficult using standard debugging systems to track down a crash when you've got half a dozen threads running. They're all running separately on their own thing. But this Blister system, it shows you everything. So I've been involved in the programming of that. That took, and obviously we had to. That works over the network, so it was quite challenge to get it working at the speed we needed it to work. Because game code runs really fast, and we didn't want it to make too much of a hit on the game code, you know. So the programmer could use it to have a constant variable readout of all his data, his arrays, graphics, everything. And it works really well, but we haven't got that out on the market yet.
But you're planning to.
Yeah, it will come out at some point.
Okay. Well, I hope
It's a huge project.
I hope it's not a secret or anything.
No.
If I have to cut something out in the end, you have to tell me, you know.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's there's a website on it somewhere, just basically, but it's still being finally debugged. I mean, we used it to write itself because it debugged itself. We couldn't have written it without having it. It sounds really odd, quite strange. Um, yeah, so that's what I've been doing programming wise, and but mainly involved in studio work still, session player. I'm still playing live gigs here and there. Um,
So what kind of live gigs and what kind of studio music are you doing nowadays?
my brother has been making. My brother's a musician, professional musician, and a daughter. And my brother has been making a couple of double albums over the last 4 or 5 years. Been working on those with him, mixing those. He'd bring those up, and we'd work on those, and he'd bring them up to mix and hear. In the studio, there'd be like 350 tracks, you know, and big job to mix and stuff like that. Good stuff though. He's got those out. Album called Hitchcock Cafe. You might see that somewhere. Yeah, I've been doing that and playing generally locally, just blues clubs, soul stuff.
The
Just
whole
keep playing.
family, the whole family is into music, right?
Um, well, my youngest daughter Holly, who's doing the Kickstarter project with me, she's a professional musician. She plays all over the place, all over the world really, and they fly her all over the place. She's a pianist, singer, and I do some gigs with her, but she's generally working a lot on her own. And my slightly elder daughter, she's a professional actress. She's been in lots of television stuff, doing stuff like that. And my brother is a professional musician. And my other 2 sisters, they're not. They don't drink.
So seeing that so many people in your family are musicians, professional, what was I guess back in the days they were already right when you started the video game music.
When I started video game music, obviously my daughters were just young.
Yeah,
With,
but your
um,
brother, for example.
my brother yeah, I mean, him and I have been working together all over London, all over Germany, over the Europe, playing basses, you know, living in the backs of transit vans, all that stuff. We've done that for years. Um, and then basically I got into programming as a hobby, as I'd said earlier,
Hmm.
to relax. And that's how I picked up doing music stuff. And he carried on doing music stuff. He doesn't program.
The reason why I'm asking this is what was the reaction of everybody? Because, you know, nowadays the video game business is bigger than the music game business. Sorry, than the music business and the
Yeah,
movie business together.
yeah,
But back in
right.
the 80s, 90s, it was a geeky thing, you know, like
Yeah,
gaming was seen as a niche thing that nerds would do, as I
yeah,
said,
that's
in
right.
your bedrooms, you know.
Yeah,
So, so what was the reaction of your family, basically?
yeah, they just exactly that really. I just thought, why are you doing that? You know, I said because I like it, basically. Yeah, but it was considered, yeah, not like it is now. I mean, if you're a game composer now, that's kind of, but in those days, it'd be like, what's that? You know, you do music for computer games. How odd, you know. That was thought of.
Well, I mean, in a way, it also changed because nowadays, I mean, who knows the music of new game titles? You know,
Mm.
who knows who did the music? Back in the days, you had credits like, and gamers were aware of who did the music, but that's not nowadays anymore.
No, I know that's a bit of a shame, really. That yeah, the musician is just well, I suppose it's because apart from obviously on the indie development side, on the big companies doing it, I mean they spend so much money and there's so many programmers. The musician hardly gets a look in really, do they? Just I think they just a lot for me on the AAA games that I hear, and I haven't heard them all obviously, and there might be some great music on some of them. It's all a bit bland. It's lost its you know lost its rock and roll. It's I know it's just had so much money chucked at it that it's just lost what it used to have, I think. But like I said before, I think the small indie companies and developers, they will still develop that stuff and they'll still use musicians and put music on that they like as opposed to something that costs a lot of money, which is what tends to happen.
So speaking about indie development and retro gaming, what's your opinion? I probably think you maybe saw that Cinemaware came back, for example, from the 80s. You know, who did Amiga, Atari, and Game Boy and C64 games. They are back and making new projects, re-releases of their old games with modern
Mm.
music, modern graphics, and actually financing themselves via Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And also other houses like 3D Realms are coming back. You know, who did all the famous games like Duke Nukem and that stuff. So. What's your opinion about that? That old game studios from the 80s and 90s are restarting now their business based on the old games.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I mean, I still think of computer games and video games, whatever you want to call them. I mean, I see people playing them on Xboxes and stuff like that, but to me, they're not the real computer. They're not the real computer games. The real ones are the ones on the Amigas and the STs and you know C64s. They're still what I consider um, computer games. Really, it's that. Well, once again, the hardware now for the coders has so little limitations that they don't have to work at it so hard, and so they don't get such good results. Um, I think back in those days, you had to work at it really hard, and so you had to really think about it. You know, and maybe a lot of people disagree, but I still think there was a lot more innovation in those days than there is now with the with the consoles anyway. Um, if the old companies are coming back and doing stuff on the old machines, I think that's going to be really good.
What's your opinion about the mobile market like smartphones? I mean, they are a bit limited compared to the modern consoles and PCs too, right?
Mm. Um, yeah, I have a smartphone like everyone else. I never play games on it. I find it too limiting. Um, it sounds rubbish, um, and the screen's too small, and you've got no controls. So yeah, I mean, I'll fiddle with them, but I would never spend any money on a game on the phone. No, no.
You
Although I know that selling that stuff, people make a lot of money out of it. I believe, don't they? So, but yeah, it's not for me. stick to something I can see.
You prefer a controller and a joystick instead of touchscreen inputs, you
Yeah,
know?
definitely.
Yeah. It's totally my opinion too. I mean, I can't stand, playing pit stop and sliding around with your fingers in cycles to get like a steering wheel
No,
control, you know?
yeah, it's madness, isn't it? I mean, you can't play Flight Simulator on a smartphone, can you?
Great. Well, is there any title you would have wished to do but you never got the chance?
Um, I'd have to think about that. There probably are, yeah, because I do hear some great stuff, and I think, oh, that's really, really good. That I can't think it offhand. But yeah, stuff that other people have, were doing it when I was doing it. I would listen to it and go, wow, that's really excellent. Can't think of any offhand, but there were quite a lot of stuff that I used to think brilliant. But
Actually, interesting question. Back in the days when you did your music for the game consoles and the computers and so on, did you actually look and listen to what the competition does? What Jeroen, Rob Hubbard, Chris Hulsbeck is doing on the machines?
I did used to hear quite a lot of it, yeah, and that would, I think I said earlier, I would go, wow, that sounds good. How do they do that? And emulate it, copy the drum sounds or the, the vibrato on the thing and say, I think we all did a bit of that. But um, yeah, I did do that. Yeah, that was I did I did listen to other people's stuff, but mainly you wouldn't get a chance because see when every time you get a game sent to you, if you get the game sent, you would be signing confidentiality clauses.
Hmm.
You couldn't show it to anyone or do anything with it or talk about it. Um, so you didn't see a lot of other games, and by the time they'd come out, you'd be so busy doing other stuff that you didn't really get a chance to see them unless you were doing a conversion. So I'd see a Rob Hubbard confidentiality agreement. Yeah, part of the contract usually that we weren't allowed to show anybody else the game or talk about when it was coming out, or what was on it, how many levels, all that. That was more or less on every game.
So, you said you have kind of listened to other stuff and copied some things that you thought were interesting. What, for example, what did you borrow from other composers?
Well, mainly not obviously, tunes and stuff, but the sounds they would get the machine to make, drum sounds. You think, oh, that's a good imitation of a snare, kind of not with samples obviously, but on C64, like the bottom end bass stuff. You listen to it and go, that's really good. That, and, kind of inspire you to kind of get the same sort of thing yourself. And I know there were some. I mean, it was a bit different for me because I think people like Rob did mainly C64, didn't he? Rob
Yes,
Hubbard. Yeah.
yes, and
So he
he
was
he
working
also
on
did some PC Roland, that MIDI device sound
it.
cards thing for the
Yeah,
for the PC,
yeah,
and he did some PC speaker music.
yeah, right. For him, yeah, I did some of that. Yeah, so I mean, I know some people kind of just work mainly on one machine, but because I was doing all of them, I never really, um, I mean, I didn't spend years on one machine. Some people did. They got really, really good at that machine, Um, a bit of a jack of all trades.
How many machines did you have?
Well, well, we did. We worked on how many did we have, or how many different ones did we have?
I mean, how many different one? I mean, I spoke to David Crane once and he said it was over 50.
No, it wouldn't have been that many. I mean, there was several Amigas, several STs, loads of C64s, all the different spectrums. What were there? Amstrads, I think we did some of them. We had them knocking about. And then obviously all the consoles, PCs, different PCs. Yeah, there would have been loads, I suppose. I don't know exactly how many. But they used to break a lot. They just stopped working one day. We didn't have time to sort out why. We just had to buy another one.
Great. So which piece or which console was so hard to do that you thought, oh my god, they really never thought about the guy who has to program or write music for it?
Um, I don't think any of them were particularly difficult. No, they were all pretty straightforward. I think I did something on something called the Conics once. That there was a console that never actually got. I don't know if it got released or not. I think we did something for the console here, and I do remember going down to see a company called the Bell Fruit Company, and I did programming and music on an arcade machine, on a fruit machine they had. I think that was very, very weird. And that was a one-off. I didn't want to do that again.
On a fruit machine, seriously?
Yeah, it was on the Bell Fruit Company or something. I can't remember what it was, but that was a one-off thing I remember doing. Obviously, the one-off things were the more difficult ones when you were set up with the Amiga or the C64 or Spectrum or whatever. You had the drivers, you knew how they worked. Just a matter of using them, really. But when a new machine came along, yeah, you have to sit and find out how it worked and get an interface to work with.
So, have you been in touch with a lot of coding languages too for the other consoles? Did you write a music driver for any machine?
For every machine we did, I wrote the drivers down. Yeah, every single one. Yeah, but obviously they were all machine code, all in assembler, but the concept is the same on all of them. So it's not, you can't port it over because it's in code, but once you understand the concept of writing to the chip and you've got to run it at the speed, it was the same on all of them really. And apart from, like I say, the C64 had the best synth, so that required a bit more intricate stuff than like the ST. There wasn't a lot you could do with it. It was, chip-wise, it was the AY chip in it was not very good. But people still got good stuff out of it.
So you didn't have to relearn everything for every new computer or console.
You had to relearn its architecture, basically.
Ah.
Like, its memory layout,
Mm.
that sort of, its interrupt, how the interrupt works, and just that sort of stuff. And obviously the chip that you were writing to. So the concept was the same really.
But I guess after a while it was a piece of cake for you, I guess.
Well, I did so many of them that you did get used to doing it, yeah.
Like, hey, let's see what machine we've got here this time, you know?
I mean, it was obviously a different machine language, 6502 was completely different to Z80 or 68,000, so you had to learn the assembly language for it.
Hmm. What I found really interesting, that you are really good on all those machines when you did the music. You really did the best possible for you in that short amount of time for the machine you had in front of you.
Yeah, I did, yeah. I would always try and do that. I remember with did music for Godfather on the Amiga, and the developers or the company that was running the developers or was handling it, I can't remember exactly who they were, they sent me videotape of the film, and the music, they wanted the intro music, basically. And they said, this is the piece, and I played it, and it was a huge, great orchestral piece of music. It was
Wow.
going to be a nightmare. So I quoted them a high price, and they agreed to it. And then they paid the advance up front. And then we found out that what the company who was, what the licensing was actually about was there was a tiny little 10-second piece of French horn music on the front of the film, and that's what they wanted. And this was on the Amiga, which meant I could sample it. So I sampled it in about 10 minutes and sent it off to them. And they were really annoyed that they had to pay me all this money for this 10-second sample. But that was one of the highs and lows of. Actually, what actually happened on that was that about 6 months or 8 months later, the company who I'd done that job for, and they paid me all that money, they went bust, owing me several £1,000s. So they got their own back on me, basically.
So it was really adventurous time back then when you explain about all those times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you stopped it, you said, because of the game companies stopping to work or something?
No, because what happened was as the gaming industry got bigger, what they wanted was more control. They didn't want to farm stuff out to developers and musicians who were working in their own premises where they couldn't see what they were doing and whether they were working 9 to 5 and all the rest of it.
Ah,
What
they didn't like remote entries, kind of.
They wanted everybody to work in-house.
Oh.
So they wanted you to go into their office and they would set up a studio, and you're supposed to go there and produce music, 9 to 5, and that just wasn't for me.
But that kind of changes again. I mean, when you look at Cinemaware, for example, they are spread all across the globe. The bosses in Brazil, the product manager is in Germany, the game designers are in UK, and even 3D Realms, they are in Mexico, they are in Sweden, Denmark, and they are all over the place. So nowadays it's going kind of backwards with remote working, and
That's technology, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, right now we are using Skype, so
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
so maybe this mentality changes a bit again, back to the one from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, maybe it will. Hopefully it will. I mean, obviously the games have got so big now that they need a squad of programmers to write them. And I don't suppose there's one of those programmers who knows how the whole thing works anymore. They just know their own bits. So that kind of element's gone, whereas it used to be one man's work, which was really great. Just two people. It'd be a small team who did it, they all knew how it worked. But now they just do their bit, slot it in.
Which makes me wonder, when thinking about the development back in the late 70s, early 80s, you had one person doing all the game. And how did you actually convince the companies that you can do a better job than the coder himself?
What, to do the music?
Yes, I mean, you would come from outside of the team and you would supply the music. Is that because the general way the games were done changed, or?
Well, it was basically that the coders weren't musicians, so they didn't know one note from another. So they had to get a musician to do it who could also program and there weren't many of us at that time around.
Ah.
You had to be able to program in machine language and be a musician, and it was quite specialised then. So,
So the problem was for the coders that technology advanced so much that you couldn't just do blip blip anymore, like in the early
yeah,
games, and would call it music. Now you
yeah,
had
that's right.
to get somebody who knows what he's doing and is specialized in music, but still knows how to code, so you could do your own sound drivers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It was very specialised, and I mean, when I was doing it, I was aware of, the people you mentioned, Rob and Alistair Brimble, um, Matt Gray. There was probably half a dozen people I knew, um, and that was it. There weren't any other more doing it. We used to get all the work, half a dozen of us, really, in the UK anyway. I think in the States it was obviously different.
Yeah, well, in
Yeah,
the States you didn't really have like big composers, you know. That's really true. I mean, America was a bit different. They didn't focus so much on game music, I guess, from what
mm,
I've heard, you know. So yeah, I think it was more like a European thing in a way.
right, right, yeah,
So now that everything changed so much after 1980, no, sorry, 1998, um, do you actually think you would return in a way when things are changing now again, where people are working from home?
yeah. I would. I mean, I would go back to doing it because I really enjoy doing it. But I never wanted to work in an office, in a studio, in an office. I like to work with my own equipment. If I want to start till 4 o'clock in the morning doing it and not start till 12 o'clock the next day, that's how I work. I don't want to have to be there at 9. And I've always been self-employed. I wouldn't want to have a company pension and no,
Mm.
not my way.
But I guess the difference is also that well, you didn't. I mean, you wouldn't have like a steady income doing from game music. I guess it would depend on how many projects you're working on at the moment, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was. You didn't know it would. It would vary from month to month. Yeah. But there was a lot of work in those days. A lot of work to the point where companies would ring and say, "Can you do the music for this?" And I'd say, "Okay, yeah, I can, but I can't start it for 6 weeks." You know,
Oh, okay.
so so you'd either lose the job because you couldn't do it, or they depends when their duplication had to do.
So, how many pieces you actually did in total for video games and computer games, you think?
Well, I looked through my invoices once to do with my VAT, and there was over 70 games, about 74 games, and obviously for each one of those there could have been half a dozen pieces of music in each, or even more. I did some of these summer games for EA at some point. And there was hundreds of bits of music in those things. Um, yeah, there was a lot. It was a lot.
You actually seem to go through all that again because I saw last year you even started your own YouTube channel. I think it's called um, Uncle Art Music or
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
And there you have like records of all the video game music you did before. At least some of them.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's my daughter's put them up.
Ah,
She's
okay.
she's see, she grew up while I was doing that stuff. So she was 9 years old, and she'd be in here, you know, playing the game that I'd put the music on, you know, and she became expert at the game. So she's a right gamer, she plays all the stuff. Yeah,
So you raised a gamer girl because
yeah,
of your
yeah,
business. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So anyway, so your hobby is well, your business returned back to your hobby actually. So you are doing programming as a hobby now, like you used before you entered the video game business.
Right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So what is your next project after the Kickstarter?
Um, I haven't got one actually. Haven't actually got one at the moment. I don't know. I fancy writing a game myself, so I might do that. I've got an idea for one that I've been knocking around with.
Ah, so actually you could become a game developer again.
Good, yeah.
Ah.
But I dream up quite a lot of games, but I never get around to. I start them and then get bored with them halfway through and
Mm.
then finish. So whether I'll actually do it or not, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I'm still involved in playing too much really with the studio and stuff. So
you are still playing games nowadays.
um, no, I don't play a lot of games. I'm more involved in music still. Um, I was thinking of buying Elite Dangerous, or what's the other one, Citizen. Um, Buying both those. Um, Space Simulator. I might buy both those. Um, I do look. I look on Kickstarter actually at the indie indie developers who are programming games on there and watch what's coming up. I like looking at you know
Great,
the little
great.
ideas they have and think that's a great idea for a game. Sometimes backing them, you know.
Well, I'm really happy that you keep on track with what you did in the past and actually looking at what other people are doing, because I'm doing these interviews a lot, and a lot of people actually said this is a part and I don't want to do it again nowadays, or I
Mm.
don't feel like picking up again. But actually, you said you would do it again.
I would do it again, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of doing it again on a game that I thought was really good, yeah, it's quite exciting. I think oh, that would be good. Yeah.
So if there was any Kickstarter project that would lack of a composer, you would say yes.
Yeah, probably would actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd have to remember how to write the drivers.
Well, as I said, you can learn it again.
Yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I basically still remember how they all work. So,
uh, I mean, it's amazing how much you can get out of old hardware nowadays. I mean, they are still finding new techniques for some machines on how to
mm,
do things. Especially since you have flash card technology. Like
yeah,
like flash card drive emulators or flash card cartridges for the consoles. Super Nintendo games with video sequences. This is
yeah,
like amazing.
it's amazing. Yeah. So like I said before, I'm just still amazed at how big that scene is. You know, retro gaming is just so massive, isn't it? And the fact that, like you said earlier, that the computer game industry is bigger than the music business and the film business is just amazing. Yeah, it's just so huge now, um, and looks like it's not going to drop away either.
I don't think so. No.
Oh,
And it's really great that I can interview people like you and who share their stories, their history, and preserve the history in a way. Have a good luck with the Kickstarter,
yeah,
and
thanks.
well, it looks quite well. It looks like quite well going. How many messages and fan posts and requests you actually get? Because you said earlier you get lots of mails.
How many have we got? Did you say?
Yeah, I mean, how many? I mean, how much interest you got in your Kickstarter thing and in your
Yeah,
music?
um, I think we're about I think we're about 33% there or something like that, round about. We've still got basically a month to go to raise the rest. we're in that kind of apparently in Kickstarter projects. They start off really well, and then they tail off, and then everybody rushes in on the last few weeks. So, you know, but, I mean, obviously, if people want it, we'll do it. But if there's not the demand there, there's no point in doing it. That's why I wanted to do it on Kickstarter, because I didn't want to spend 6 or 8 months doing something, taking all the time doing it, and then nobody's really interested, you know. So the good thing about Kickstarter is it does show you whether there's a demand for it.
I mean, there have been projects who got more than they actually wanted to have, you know.
Yeah.
But I hope if you have a close run, you know, because sometimes that happens, that you don't give up, because I really want to hear that stuff. I'm a big fan, you know. My phone's ringtone is actually Power Drift, yeah. So so when my mobile rings, people are like, what kind of ringtone is that? And I said, well, it's Power Drift from the C64, you know.
I've been on the train and heard, especially the Starglider piece where I'm singing on it. That short, I've heard that on the train many times. People have that on their ringtone. Quite weird to hear that. You know, suddenly that's me.
And then you can say, hey, that is from me, actually, yeah. So that's also an interesting question. Do you consider yourself famous in a way?
No, not at all.
Not at all. But do people sometimes recognize you, or when they read your name, like that guy, you know?
Only people in, you know, like yourself who are interested in retro gaming, they know the name Dave Lowe or Uncle Clark, but because of music, but that's it. I mean, people around here, people I live with, friends around here, they know nothing about it.
Great. All right. So, I wish you good luck with your future projects and your Kickstarter. And, yeah. And hope it's getting successful, yeah. Actually, I'm looking forward to receive my signed version of it, you know.
You will, if we get it.
Great. So thank you, Dave, and have a good evening. Right? It was great talking to you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I keep programming this stuff, and all of a sudden I see on the screen my pieces, which I could kind of move left and right, and I could rotate them and I could place them. But all of a sudden, all the screen is filled up.
Not only in Germany. Hello. I worked in Hong Kong, I worked in the US, I worked in Germany, of course.
Make some effects. I bought a costume, I bought the hat, and so it started with the Retro Hunter. It was one of these sites, the gamescrowd.com. I started it there, and then I was in another community, and one of them is an editor at Gamers Global, and he said, hey, if you want to write news on Gamers Global, we have user-generated content. And I started there and presented it there, and after 3 shows, Jörg Langer, one of the founder of the GameStar and editor-in-chiefs of them, is also at the Spieleveteran podcast. He contacted me and he asked, okay, I have interest to present this show exclusively. And I said, okay, that is cool, because I want to start in this business.